Rejection, a small word, but it carries the weight of 1,000 echoes. It isn't just the moment someone turns away or the silence after a message left unanswered. It's the tremor that moves through old corridors inside you, places you thought time had sealed shut. It doesn't simply sting in the present. It awakens something ancient, something fragile, something that remembers. Rejection isn't about what happened today. It's about what your nervous system learned long ago, that belonging meant safety and being left meant danger. It's about the child inside you who once believed that love was oxygen and silence was a threat. That is why rejection hits harder than logic can explain. It doesn't just say they left. It whispers you're not enough to stay for so you adapt. You build a version of yourself that's easier to accept, easier to love, easier to keep. You learn to please, to shrink, to shape-shift around the edges of other people's comfort. You trade pieces of your truth for their presence. It's not weakness, it's survival. Because once upon a time, that mask kept you alive. But here's the thing about masks. They are meant to be tools, not homes. And when you live inside one long enough, you forget the sound of your own voice. Then rejection arrives, like a hammer against porcelain, and the mask shatters. All the pieces you buried to be chosen come spilling out. The anger you swallowed, the hunger you silenced, the sadness you hid behind your smile. That's why rejection doesn't just feel painful, it feels catastrophic. Because you're not only losing someone else, you're losing the identity you built to keep them. But buried inside that collapse is a quiet truth. Rejection isn't only a wound, it's a mirror. It shows you not just who left, but who you left behind in yourself. And if you're willing to stop running from that reflection, if you can hold your ground long enough to listen, a different voice begins to rise. Not the one begging to be chosen, but the one remembering its own worth. That voice doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. It only needs you to turn toward it. Because everything begins the moment you stop fearing rejection like death and start seeing it as an invitation to come home to yourself. Rejection is never just about the moment someone walks away. It reaches deeper, down into the oldest layers of your nervous system, the places built long before words, before reasoning, before defenses. It's not the adult who panics in that silence. It's the child who once believed that love and survival were the same thing. As children, we arrive in the world dependent. We can't feed ourselves. We can't protect ourselves. Our safety is written in someone else's eyes. If they hold us, we're safe. If they turn away, we're exposed. It's simple, it's primal, and it's the foundation on which every future connection is built. So when love is withheld, when presence vanishes, when approval disappears, the body learns a terrifying story. If I'm not chosen, I'm not safe. This story doesn't stay in childhood. It hides, waiting, buried beneath ambition and achievements, under confidence and charm. And then one small rejection can pull the pin on years of silence. A text left unanswered, a friend drifting away, a lover's cold tone. Suddenly, that old wound opens, and your reaction seems bigger than the situation. That's because it is. It's the echo of a time when rejection didn't just mean pain, it meant danger. The tragedy is that no one tells us this is what's happening. We're taught to toughen up, to get over it, to call it weakness or overreaction. But your body isn't weak. It's remembering. It's trying to protect you from a storm that's already passed. And instead of listening to that wound, most of us build our lives around not feeling it again. That we chase approval like oxygen. We keep busy so silence doesn't catch us. We build personas that make it harder to be rejected. We think if we can just be perfect, beautiful enough, useful enough, impressive enough, no one will ever leave again. But what we're really doing is begging the world to promise us a safety it can't give. This is the abandonment complex, not a flaw, but a memory. A wound that never got to heal because no one showed us how. But the moment you name it, the moment you stop calling it weakness, something begins to change. You stop confusing rejection with danger. You stop fighting ghosts. And for the first time, you see that what hurts isn't who left. It's the part of you still waiting to be held. Rejection doesn't just sting, it hijacks you. One moment you're standing in the present. The next you're pulled into a storm that feels much bigger than what just happened. Logic gets drowned out by an old, familiar panic. It's not because you're weak. It's because your nervous system can't tell the difference between then and now. This is why a small act of rejection can feel catastrophic. It taps the oldest alarms in your mind. It awakens that ancient story. If they leave, I am not safe. And once those alarms go off, your psyche shifts into survival mode. Clarity disappears. You stop responding to what's real and start reacting to what you once feared. Your mind begins to build stories that don't belong to the moment. They don't care about me. I'll end up alone. I'll never be enough. You start defending yourself against threats that may not even exist. But when the wound is open, perception bends. Every silence feels louder. Every glance feels sharper. Every delay feels like proof that your deepest fear was right, and so you react. You chase after their attention like it's oxygen. You over-explain. You apologize for existing. Or you do the opposite. You shut down completely, pretending nothing touches you while quietly collapsing on the inside. It's not about what happened now. It's about everything your body remembers. Rejection scrambles the boundary between reality and memory. It makes a cold text message feel like a threat to your worth. It turns an unanswered call into proof that you're unlovable. It's not the world doing this to you. It's your own unhealed wound, whispering the same old lie. You're not enough to stay for. But here's what changes everything. When you know this is what's happening, you reclaim power. You realize that not every emotional hurricane deserves to be believed. You learn to pause, to breathe, to remind yourself, this feeling is old, but this moment is new. The wound may be real, but the story it tells doesn't have to rule you. If rejection can hijack the mind, awareness can bring it back home. And that's where healing begins. Not when the world stops rejecting you, but when their silence no longer decides who you are. When rejection cuts too deep, most people don't heal, they adapt. They learn to wear masks. Not the obvious kind, the quiet, invisible ones. The smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. The apologies made just for existing. The carefully constructed selves designed not to be rejected again. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask we build to survive in the world. It isn't evil. It's necessary. We all need some form of it to navigate relationships, work, and society. But for many of us, the persona stops being a tool and becomes a cage. Especially when that mask is built not on who we are, but on who we think they'll keep. So we become the dependable one, the agreeable one, the impressive one, the perfect one. We build entire identities around pleasing, performing, or proving our worth. We learn how to smile when we want to scream, how to nod when we want to walk away, how to shine just enough to be chosen, but never so much that it threatens anyone else. At first, the mask feels safe. It gets us love or something that looks like it. But over time, it begins to consume us. Every moment spent being who they want is a moment lost from being who we are. And the cruel part is, even when people do love us, they're not loving us. They're loving the mask. And somewhere deep down, we know it. That's why it never feels solid. Living behind a mask means every interaction becomes a performance, and every rejection becomes a personal collapse. Because when your worth depends on being chosen, rejection doesn't just hurt. It erases the self you worked so hard to keep hidden. It's not just someone walking away. It's the stage lights going dark. But here's the truth you're meant to remember. Masks keep you safe, but they also keep you small. You can't build a real connection on top of something fake. And no matter how beautiful the mask is, it will eventually crack, because your soul was never meant to live behind someone else's expectations. Healing begins when you stop wearing the mask as armor and start letting your truth breathe again. When the mask cracks, something else begins to rise, something older, heavier, and far more honest. The shadow. Carl Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we learn to bury in order to be accepted. The anger we were told was too much. The softness that was dismissed as weakness. The hunger for love we were shamed for showing. All of it packed away in silence, waiting for a moment like this. Rejection rips the surface wide open, and when it does, the shadow steps out, not to destroy you, but to remind you of everything you've abandoned in yourself just to feel safe. That's why rejection feels like chaos. It's not only the loss of someone else, it's the sudden flood of your own forgotten self. When this happens, most people panic. They scramble to rebuild the mask, to get back to what's familiar, to silence the parts of themselves they swore would never see the light again. But the shadow isn't a threat. It's a mirror. And if you can stand in front of that mirror without flinching, something powerful happens. You start to see your rage not as something shameful, but as a signal of your boundaries. You start to see your longing not as weakness, but as proof you're still alive. You begin to realize that everything you hid away was never your enemy. It was your power, exiled and waiting. The shadow emerges not to break you, but to offer you a choice. Keep running, or finally face yourself. Most run, but those who stay change. They begin to integrate what they once rejected. They stop trying to be only good or pleasing and start becoming whole. And wholeness is far stronger than perfection. Rejection becomes the storm that strips away your disguises. And in its silence, your shadow whispers, "I've been here all along, waiting for you to stop pretending." This is the part most people never reach, because meeting your shadow is uncomfortable, but it's also the exact place where your power begins. If the mask was built to survive, the shadow is what allows you to live. Once the shadow surfaces, something becomes painfully clear. We've spent so much of our lives not actually living, but performing for love, for attention, for belonging. And in a world louder than ever before, that performance is rewarded, not with safety, but with validation. Every scroll, every like, every unanswered message, each one whispers a story about our worth. And slowly, almost without noticing, we start handing out pieces of ourselves like currency, paying for the illusion of being chosen. But the truth is brutal. Validation is not love. It's applause. And applause is loud. But it never lasts. That we learn to measure our value by the noise around us. How many people approve? How many say yes? How many reflect back the mask we've worn so well? But in that cycle, we forget something sacred. Real worth doesn't make noise. It doesn't need to be broadcast to be real. This is the trap of external validation. You begin to live like a house built on shifting sand. Every silence feels like rejection. Every absence feels like collapse. Your identity rises and falls with how others see you, or if they see you at all. And the scariest part, you might not even notice. You'll call it ambition. You'll call it connection. You'll call it keeping up. But underneath all that noise, there's a quiet terror. The terror of facing who you are without someone else's approval to define it. But here's the truth that breaks the chain. The more you depend on external noise to feel whole, the louder your fear of silence will grow. And the louder that fear grows, the easier it is to lose yourself in the chase. Rejection then isn't just painful. It feels like the ground itself has vanished. But silence isn't proof of your lack. It's proof of an opportunity, a chance to meet yourself where no applause can reach. That's where something unshakable is born. The moment you stop begging the world to tell you who you are, you finally have the space to decide for yourself. And in that space, rejection loses its power, because no one can take away a worth they didn't give. At some point, the chase gets exhausting. The masks get heavy. The noise becomes unbearable. And in that quiet, something deeper begins to call, not the desperate cry to be chosen, but the quiet pull to finally choose yourself. This is where the real journey begins. Carl Jung called this the path of individuation, the process of becoming whole. It's not about becoming perfect or untouchable. or immune to pain. It's about learning to stand in your own center, even when the world refuses to applaud. Individuation begins the moment you stop outsourcing your identity. When you stop waiting for someone else to hand you a mirror and decide what you're worth. When you finally turn inward and say, I will not abandon myself anymore. This path isn't glamorous. It's slow. It's uncomfortable. Some days, it will feel like walking through fire barefoot. Because everything you built to survive, the mask, the performance, the hunger for approval, must be stripped away piece by piece. But with each layer you shed, what remains becomes more real. Individuation isn't about building a new self. It's about remembering the one that's always been there. The one who existed before rejection, before masks, before fear told you who you were allowed to be. And once you meet that version of yourself, something shifts. Rejection no longer defines you. It simply reveals who isn't meant to walk beside you. Practical steps can be small. Daily check-ins with your feelings instead of silencing them. Naming your boundaries, not apologizing for them. Choosing your silence over shallow approval. These are quiet, invisible revolutions, but they are revolutions all the same. Individuation is the art of no longer begging for a seat at someone else's table. It's building your own. It's realizing that belonging starts within, not without. And in that truth, rejection transforms from a wound into a filter, removing what isn't aligned and leaving behind only what is. The path to yourself is not loud. It's steady, and the farther you walk it, the less power external noise will ever have over you again. There comes a moment in this journey where you stop trying to silence your shadow and start listening to it. The shadow, the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, or feared, doesn't disappear when ignored. It waits, patiently, and the day you choose to face it, everything begins to change. Integration isn't about defeating your shadow or erasing it. It's about sitting with it, hearing it, understanding the language of your own hidden self. The anger you swallowed wasn't your enemy. It was the signal that something was wrong. The shame you carried wasn't proof you were broken. It was the scar of being told you weren't allowed to exist as you are. The fear wasn't weakness. It was protection, trying to keep you alive. When you finally stop running, the shadow no longer needs to scream. It softens. It becomes part of your power. The pieces that once terrified you start fitting back into place. And what once felt fragmented becomes whole again. This is the final threshold, the point where rejection loses its grip because you no longer reject yourself. You no longer need the world to accept every part of you because you already have. And once that happens, rejection from others no longer feels like a death sentence. It's just information, a redirection, not a collapse. Integration isn't loud. It doesn't look like fireworks or grand victories. It looks like breathing easier. It looks like saying no without shaking. It looks like looking at your reflection, the bright and the dark, and finally not turning away. The shadow was never the villain. The villain was the lie that you needed to cut yourself in half to be loved. Real strength is found in wholeness, in holding both light and darkness without shame. When rejection comes, and it will, it no longer has the power to shatter you, because nothing outside of you can break what has been fully accepted within. That is the quiet revolution of shadow work. The world can turn away, but you will not. In the end, it all comes down to this. Rejection will happen. People will leave. Opportunities will pass. Doors will close. The world will not always choose you. But that was never the point. The point was to stop abandoning yourself every time someone else did. You don't need to be chosen to be whole. You don't need applause to be real. You don't need validation to exist. What you need, what you've always needed, is to remember the power of standing in your own center, even when the world grows silent. When you stop fearing rejection, something unexpected happens. The same silence that once crushed you begins to feel like freedom. The space left behind isn't empty, it's yours. It's the place where your voice, unshaken and unapologetic, begins to rise, that you'll start to see that rejection was never proof of your unworthiness. It was proof that you'd outgrown the places where you once begged to belong. It was proof that your life isn't meant to be built around who stays, but around who you become when they leave. So let them go. Let the silence come. Let the pain teach you, not break you. Choose to become the person who stands unshaken, not because they're invincible, but because they're rooted, because they've stopped waiting for permission to exist. This is the quiet power that can't be taken away, not by rejection, not by silence, not by absence. When the storm comes, you will not beg the wind to be gentle. You will simply stand. If this message reaches you, let it be a reminder. The real victory isn't in being chosen. It's in choosing yourself, fully, fiercely, without apology. That's where your freedom begins. Comment below, I choose myself. Subscribe for more deep, cinematic philosophy and mindset awakenings. And when the silence finds you again, as it will, remember this moment. You're not lost. You're returning home. Rejection isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your becoming. For most of your life, rejection has felt like a wound, a door slammed shut, a cold silence echoing louder than words. But what if it was never meant to be your breaking point, but your turning point? Every no you've ever faced didn't just remove something from your life. It revealed something within you. Every time someone walked away, you met another piece of yourself you had forgotten to love. That is the quiet revolution. The realization that the thing you feared the most is what leads you back to yourself. There's a strength that doesn't need to shout, a clarity that doesn't beg, a power that doesn't come from being accepted, but from no longer needing to be. That strength lives inside you. It's been here all along, beneath the layers of masks, the weight of old stories, the noise of borrowed identities. When the world turns away, you no longer have to chase it. You can let it go. You can stand in the silence, not as someone abandoned, but as someone becoming whole. Because once you've chosen yourself, rejection loses its teeth. It can no longer shape your worth, only redirect your path. So if you're listening to this in a quiet room, with a heart that knows what rejection feels like, let this land gently. You are not unworthy. You are awakening. Every loss you thought would end you has been quietly leading you back home. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unshakable. You don't have to fear rejection anymore. You just have to remember who you are when it happens. Protect your peace. Build your center. Choose yourself. And when the world grows silent, let your stillness speak louder than any applause ever could. Comment, I choose myself. Subscribe if these words found a home in you. And the next time rejection comes knocking, don't run from it. Walk through it. Meet yourself on the other side.